Good morning and good afternoon, colleagues. I would like to invite you to today's webinar, ESMAP webinar on sustainable electricity for schools and health centers. It's a report launched today. I just want to introduce you to our speakers and panel members and tell you the run of the show. The opening remarks will be provided by our Infrastructure Vice President, Valerie. And then we'll have a small presentation on the report, about 5 to 6 minutes of presentation, which will be provided by one of the authors, Andrea Aricale. This report was actually drafted by a large team, so Andrea is representing the whole team today. And then we will have a moderated discussion. We have invited our director, global director, Demetrios, to moderate the session. We'll have 3 panel members. Given that we're talking about sustainable electricity for schools and health centers, we also have our global director from Education and Skills, Mr. Christian Bodwick, who is representing the education sector, and we'll hear from him about how this report can help in the electrification of schools. Then we have government representatives. We invited the head of Nigeria Electrification Program of the Rural Electrification Agency, Olufemi Akinieleru. However, he may be joining a little late. Before he joins, he will be represented by Chidera Achinania, Program Manager for Public Institutions of REA of Nigeria. And then to represent the private sector, we have invited Ms. Tombo Banda, Managing Director of Cross Boundary Group. This is a hybrid session. We have people joining both online and in person. Those who are in office, I would request them if they can come to the MC 5100, that would be nice. Otherwise, those online, when you're speaking, please unmute. Otherwise, please keep your microphone muted. We will be taking questions throughout through the chat, but we'll also have a Q&A session. So we will decide which questions we can respond during the discussion and which questions we will leave for the Q&A. With that, maybe I will invite Valerie to come up to stage and give her opening remarks. Valerie.
Yes, thank you very much. I hope you hear me. So good morning and good afternoon, distinguished Quest and World Bank Group colleagues. So thank you to our speakers and participants joining us for governments, development institutions, private sector, and civil society. Also, thank you to the many colleagues, as was said, from the Energy Sector Management Assistance Program, our ESMAP, the World Bank Group, and our partner organizations who made the report we are launching today and made our discussion possible. Reliable electricity for schools and health centers is fundamentally about people, as you know. It's about whether a mother can safely deliver a baby at night, whether vaccines can be refrigerated, and whether students can access digital learning tools and remain connected to the broader world. Ultimately, it's about whether communities have the services they need to thrive. Yet, despite decades of investment, access to reliable electricity in schools and health centers remains one of the most overlooked development challenges. Today, nearly 1 billion people are served by health facilities that have no electricity or unreliable electricity. In sub-Saharan Africa, only about half of hospitals report reliable access to power. Millions of students continue to attend schools without electricity. Nearly 1/3 of Africa's school-age children live closest to schools that are without power. So the challenge is not a lack of technology, as you all know. Technical solutions exist for virtually every type of facility and location, and costs are fallen dramatically. So what's the challenge we are discussing today? The challenge is making the installed power systems work in the long run. It's about their sustainability. For too long, electrification efforts have focused on installing equipment rather than ensuring service delivery in the long run. So once projects close, maintenance, monitoring, and replacement funding often fall away and performance deteriorates or stops. So the central message of the report we are launching today is that one-time installation alone is necessary, but insufficient. Long-term operability needs to be the goal. That shift in perspective changes how projects are financed. It's changed how risks are allocated, and it changed how success is measured. Interestingly, the report introduced the 5P framework, so public-private partnership for people's prosperity. At its core, it is a simple idea. Governments should procure energy services, not only equipment. Through long-term, performance-based contract, private operators are responsible for installation, maintenance, monitoring, and service delivery over the life of the contract. Payments are linked to results, accountability is strengthened, and public resources can leverage private investment. And we know that this can work. So countries including Nigeria, and thank you for being here today, Uganda, Madagascar, and Malawi are already demonstrating that service-based approach improves sustainability while attracting private sector participation. Reliable electrification sits at the intersection of several bank group priorities. It contributes directly to Mission 300 and the goal of expanding electricity access across sub-Saharan Africa. It supports universal health coverage for 1.5 billion people by improving the quality of health services. And it enables digital learning to eradicate learning poverty and build job skills. The challenge ahead is to find ways of moving from pilot initiatives to a systematic approach that can be adopted and scaled across many countries. This is where ESMAP, the World Bank Group, and all our partners have an important role to play. At a global level, we need to continue developing knowledge, tools, and public goods to help countries design sustainable electrification programs. At the country level, we need to work alongside regional teams and governments to translate concepts into operations that place service delivery and long-term sustainability at the center. And beyond the energy sector, we need to strengthen collaboration with our colleagues in education, health, digital development, and finance. Sustainable electrification ultimately depends on planning, budgeting, and the integration of energy services into broader sector strategies. So, to conclude, my challenge for today's discussion is that we move from success stories to practical actions. How do we mobilize greater public and private investment? How do we embed these approaches into sector planning and budgeting? And how do we ensure that reliable electricity becomes a sustained service rather than a one-time infrastructure project? If we get this right all together, we are not simply electrifying schools or health centers. We are creating conditions for better learning, better healthcare, stronger human capital, and greater opportunity for millions of people. So I look forward to the discussion ahead. Thank you very much. And the floor is yours.
Thank you, Valerie. Thank you so much for your very comprehensive opening remarks. I think in 5 minutes, you have covered 5 years of work that the team had been working on. And the questions that you have raised today at the launching, we are going to have that discussion. So to help that moderated discussion, I'm requesting Andrea to come up and give a very brief presentation. I mean, Valerie has covered most of it, but please provide some details so that the moderate discussion can found it on. Okay, thank you, Andrea.
Thank you very much. I hope you can all see my slides.
Yes, come.
All right. So good morning, good afternoon. My name is Andrea Ricale, and I'm an energy specialist with ESMAP. So Valerie has already stated the challenges that we are facing. So now let's just examine why they persist and how can we address them. So Valerie has mentioned already some figures that state the scale of the challenge, but now let's focus on why has progress been so difficult. And this lies in two fundamental issues. The first one is a scale issue, because electrification of public institutions has historically relied almost entirely on public and donor funding with no room for private sector investment. But secondly, it's a sustainability issue, because the sector has utilized business models that struggle to deliver service over time. Traditional models shown here illustrate these challenges, where government or donors procure a provider to install a system with limited operations and maintenance, and once that support ends, accountability disappears, service quality declines, and systems fail. Evidence from Uganda and Ethiopia found that this happens to 30 to 50% of installed systems after just a few years, against an expected lifetime of 15 plus years. So if the current model struggles to deliver scale and sustainability, then perhaps we have been asking ourselves the wrong question when it comes to electrifying schools and health centers. Traditionally, we have asked, how do we install solar systems for school and health centers? But experience shows that this is no longer sufficient. Installing equipment does not guarantee reliable electricity, and ultimately, this is what matters. The question therefore needs to evolve. Not how do we install solar system, but rather how do we deliver sustainable energy services at scale. And here is our proposition in the report, the 5P model mentioned by Valerie, PPPs for people's prosperity. At the core is a very simple idea. We want to bring in government, private sector, and development partners to deliver reliable and affordable services to underserved communities. Traditional PPPs work on commercially viable projects, usually, but a 5P model is designed to extend those benefits to populations that would otherwise be left behind. The framework is built on two building blocks. The first one, as we've seen, shifting from assets to services, where we measure success not only on the systems installed, but whether reliable service continue to be delivered over time. The second building block is shifting from public funding to public leverage. So rather than fully financing projects, governments and development partners should use public resources strategically to mobilize private capital and expertise. And you see on the left-hand side, the energy as a service business model, which lies at the core of the 5P framework as one of its examples. Under this model, governments contract ESCOs or energy service companies to deliver services for the long term. ESCOs are responsible for the whole thing, designing, financing, installing, operating, and maintaining systems, while payments are made to performance. And this is a simple but very powerful change in incentives, because the accountability continues for more than 10 years, which is the length of the contract. Government payments then are made affordable by development partners through viability gap funding, concessional loans, guarantees, and the risking mechanism. Valerie mentioned a few countries, such as Nigeria, which we have here, Uganda, Madagascar, and Malawi, which are implementing this approach already. And this brings us to what I believe is the most important question that we are raising. And this is the question: how does each actor see their role as we move from concept to scale? These experiences show that governments, development partners, private sectors, and beneficiary sectors like health and education all have a role to play. The challenge now is, how can each actor create the condition for the 5P model from moving from concept to scale? And that is the conversation we'd like to have today. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Andrea. Before I give the floor to Demetrios, let me just check whether all of our discussants are here. I mean, of course, Christian is here. We have checked. Tombo is also connected. But I just wanted to confirm that whether we have anyone from Nigeria Rural Electrification Agency. I don't see Femi here, but his representative, Chidera, are you connected? Can you please confirm?
Femi's connected.
Hello,
Is
everyone.
Chidera-
Good. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Sorry.
we can.
Yeah.
Right, perfect. Yes, this is Chidera. Yes, I'm connected. I'll be
Thank you.
representing in the meantime. Yeah.
Good. Thank you. Thank you. So with that, I'd like to hand over the floor to Demetrios. Just one clarification, because we often get this question. This report, we have focused on electrification through standalone solar, because with grid connection and mini grid, we are electrifying schools and health centers, and that happens sustainably because it's a service-based model inherently. But with standalone solar, we had this challenge, and this is why this report is about. So with that clarification, I'm handing it over to Demetrios.
Thanks a lot, Rayhan, and thanks a lot to Valerie and Andrea. We're discussing about how, as we look into increasing electrification, we have a Mission 300 that we've been working quite intensively for some time now. And we feel that the opportunity to provide electricity for education and health building is clearly one of the parts of Mission 300, but it's an opportunity to make sure that we can do it in a sustainable way, both in terms of attracting private capital, but also making sure that once investments are taking place, once panels, batteries are installed, then we make sure that they work and that they can provide the service for a long time. So we have a really interesting panel here. We have Christian, who is our Global Director for Education for our Knowledge Bank. We have Chidera, who's representing the Nigeria Electrification Project, and Tombo, who is one of the private sector companies engaged in the sector. So just to kick us off, let me just confirm the basics with Christian. And the question that I have for you, Christian, is from your perspective in the education, what do we feel about how electrification of schools can contribute into a better learning environment and improved education outcomes?
Thanks a lot. First of all, very happy to be here, and congratulations on the report, which I think is super timely, and I'll explain why it's super timely. So in the education and skills space, we're concerned with one number in particular, which is 70% of 10-year-olds in low and middle income countries who struggle to read an age-appropriate text. So we're in school, but we're not learning. And that's critical, of course, as a barrier. If you struggle to make sense of a basic text, it is a critical barrier in the age of AI, where it's the critical thinking skills, the reasoning skills that build on literacy and numeracy, which will make us complementary to AI. So that's really our concern. And if I look at this report and I look at the approach that we're now taking, it's really a very powerful illustration of what is great when you step out of your sector silo. I like this invest and forget, install and forget approach, which is a very sectoral thing. Well, in fact, once you begin to connect the dots and you realize that, the interconnectivity that is there that we need to take advantage of and be mindful of, then the solutions become so much more powerful. And I think we're at this point now in the development discourse where we connect these things and we recognize that the business of education and skills development is one that critically relies on energy and that critically relies on digital. And so in that sense, it's about making sure that the learning environment is there for the skills acquisition to take place. And in particular, because now we're looking very carefully at how AI tools can complement very often poorly trained teachers, right? How through an AI tutor, you can complement the teacher and help the student navigate learning content on numeracy and literacy. Well, but that requires electricity, obviously. So I think the proposition of this is so obvious, but also the flip side of moving from this install and forget to a service approach where it's also clear that the education sector has a role to play in worrying about electricity. So it's not something that you outsource to someone else and you complain when it's not there, but you recognize that you have a role to play in terms of making sure that services are paid for and therefore are being provided. And I think what's powerful here is if we can, and that's the step in the direction that this report is taking, identify what is the scalable solution in this space. What are the roles of the individual actors, and be very precise about that so that we can actually put this on the table and say, this is the framework that we're putting into action. And then obviously tailoring it to the particular country context, which may be different in Nigeria or Uganda or where you want to take a look at.
Thanks a lot, Christian. And I really appreciate what you say that we know that in many of the countries where we work, sometimes there is a deficit in the number of teachers who are present. Sometimes there's a deficit in the quality of teachers. And as we look forward, I know that you guys are working on how we can bring artificial intelligence to strengthen the system. And clearly, the system cannot be in place unless there is electricity in schools. So let's switch forward and go to Chideya. And thank you for joining us, Chideya.
Femi is here.
Oh, sorry, Femi, you
joined.
Sorry. First of all, thanks for joining us. I really appreciate that you could do it. Let me ask you. We know that Nigeria has been working on an ambitious effort. First, the Nigeria electrification project. Then we had the Nigeria DARES. And you're trying to scale up distributed renewable energy solutions for schools, health centers, and other public facilities, while you're also creating the conditions for a longer-term private sector participation for sustainable electrification and service delivery. So what do you see as the major challenges that you have been facing so far?
Thank you very much, and good morning, good afternoon to everyone, and thank you for having me on this call. I'll be taking this from the programmatic point of view and giving practical examples to, lessons we've learned and difficulties that we encountered, in implementing. As we all know, the DARES, the Nigerian Electrification Project, was a precursor to the DARES. But what a lot of people don't know or might know is that when it comes to public institutions, the government itself had funded what we call the Energizing Education Phase 1. And that was the country's first attempt at, I would say, a medium to large scale in terms of powering universities and teaching hospitals at that level. What that allowed us to do was to very practically now, not even theoretically, learn a lot of lessons along the way. And one key aspect of that, which we learned, is what really is the bedrock of the report, which is that it's not about the installation, but it's about the sustainability, it's about how long the systems actually stay on and give the delivery that these institutions need. One other aspect, very importantly, was the fact that there had to be a lot of sensitization also from the government end. So it also depends on who's funding. And a lot of institutions, especially public institutions, when they see it's government that is funding, there's an issue of, willingness. There's the ability to pay, which is a different thing, but there's also the willingness and the structures in place to even pay in the first place. So I'll give you straight up from our lessons in Nigeria. The first set of projects that we developed were not paid for. So it was just installation, the electrons were being delivered to the universities, and it was a handover to the universities. And over the 3-4 years, I would say, we've seen in terms of functionality, a lot of those systems break down over time because the expertise, are just not there. And, the whole idea of having, an energy service company that can, maintain, operate over the period of time became very prevalent to us. So that was part of the engineering and the design that really went into, the first or the second phase of it, which was the energizing education phase 2, which we were able to learn a lot of these lessons from. Another key aspect that I would say is in the area of, the supply chain and just the macroeconomics of things in terms of availability of equipment, the fact that, prices, went up over the period. And for a lot of the energy service companies, if we were going to be dealing from a service point of view, we need to ensure that there's no forex risk, that is, going to go in there along with the investments that they want to make. And I'll just round off, by saying again that, I can't overemphasize the need for sensitization and coordination with all the stakeholders in the space. From this end, for example, apart from the agency that's implementing, we have the Ministry of Education, Ministry of Health, we have the private sector, we have the regulators, and just ensuring that there is always a coordinated approach. Right, we could always speak about the models, the designs, but if there's no coordinated approach towards implementation, then it all falls apart. And I think I'll just anchor there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I mean, I really appreciate your insight in terms of how do you make sure that you can coordinate all these different ministries and agencies that can be a challenge. And I also noticed that you mentioned the risk of managing foreign exchange, which we know is a significant challenge in establishing long-term contracts and contractual obligations, especially in Africa, but not just in Africa. So with this, let's go to the other side of Africa, from Africa West to Africa East in Nairobi. And Tombo, I understand you're the managing director of Cross Boundary, which is working on these issues for quite some time now. And I wanted to ask you, what do you see as the critical conditions that are needed to make projects for electrifying schools and hospitals under contractual arrangements? What do you see as the main issues, the critical conditions from a private sector perspective?
Yes, thank you very much. Hello, everyone. My name is Tombo Band. I lead the Innovation Lab at Cross Boundary, where we have been examining different business models, primarily to do with energy access, but mini grids and healthcare electrification falls under that. So I think the first point that I want to touch on is to buttress Femi's point around coordination around the ministries. It might not be the first thing you think of when you think of the private sector, but I'll tell you why we think this is important and where we have seen the impact of this. So, if we have situations where the Ministry of Energy, the Ministry of Finance, Health and Education are coordinated in their plans for electrification, not only of schools and hospitals, but communities, number one, not only can there be a more efficient play of infrastructure, but secondly, it creates the scale, right? The scale that starts to make things interesting for the private sector to participate in any such programs where you want them to be the ESCOs who are providing this service delivery. So first thing is that coordination allows some scale. If you are planning across a nationwide catchment, and that allows you to think of electrifying communities in addition to hospitals and institutions. I know the focus of this discussion is around standalone solar for electrification of these institutions. But what we have been looking at in Malawi is actually modular solutions for electrifying the communities around these institutions, so that additional revenues from those businesses, households that are getting services can also be used as incentives for those to participate in these programs. Because as Femi rightly pointed out, there's perception issues when governments are funding things. If there is incentives around contracts that could be with governments, but potential additional revenues from communities, businesses and communities that these ESCOs could provide services to, we see that these sorts of business models is what can attract the private sector to take place. And another thing I'll add around the holistic planning across different institutions and coordination is that not only do you get more sort of efficient infrastructure delivery, if these communities are rightly set up with access to agricultural inputs, access to agricultural processing machinery, access to markets, they are viable end customers, viable communities, which ESCOs are then interested in participating in servicing those communities, which ultimately is what we need for successful service delivery and successful contracts with governments. So I think that's the first thing I'll sort of anchor around is that that coordination and that planning and that clarity around where this electrification will take place, potential additional revenues that can be generated by participating in these programs, and ultimately view to increased revenue, increased market share in future could really increase private sector participation. I'll pause there, but I'm happy to also share evidence of what we're seeing in our few sites in Malawi where we have developers bringing out this energy as a service model.
Thank you very much, Tomo. And I appreciate what you said in terms of trying to make sure that we can create the right packages of combining investments in the schools and in education facilities, maybe in the health centers, and try to leverage that also with opportunities for electrifying communities and businesses. So maybe the question I would like to ask you is, and we know that the development finance institutions are a critical factor in providing some of the funding that helps with these programs. I would ask you, what do you think would be more important for us, our teams, when we look at these designs? What kind of financing instruments do you think are more valuable and more effective to get the private sector involved and have more sustainable results?
Yeah, I think the first thing is just very clear and simple subsidy structures. So, if the private sector knows that, if they install a system here, they will get X amount of, X subsidy for that within a timely fashion, that's number one, clear and simple. Number two, there's all sorts of incentives that can be around, hedging forex risks, etc. Providing local debt and currency solutions. I think those are available, but I think if there was just one thing I would anchor, it's just those clear and simple incentives for putting out that CapEx. And that's the clearest place where you can have subsidies from DFIs and all can really support to get the private sector participating. I think when it comes to these sustained payments over time from governments, those should flow and should indeed flow. But if there is clear upfront de-risking of the CapEx, I think that's the most important part. And routes and avenues for additional revenues from communities or other sources as part two is the second part. I think clear and simple subsidy structures to offset initially would be number one.
Thanks a lot, Tombo. And let me just switch back to you, Femi, and ask you, as we heard, we need to have, and you were the one that raised the issue of coordinating things and trying to make sure that we give opportunities to investors to take advantage not only of a particular school or health center contract, but try to see if we can expand this to communities. So I wanted to ask you, what have you seen as you're helping with advancing implementation of electrification programs in Nigeria? What are the kind of practical lessons that are emerging regarding the operation side, the maintenance side, making sure that the installers are accountable and are indeed providing the services over longer periods of time?
Thank you very much for that. And I think I'll just take it off from the point around coordination, and I'll speak to a few lessons because of time. But the first one, which I think is critical, closely related to the issue of coordination, is the fact that every project requires a clearly defined operational responsibility matrix from day one and not after commissioning. And I think that's a key lesson that we have learned over time. That I feel a lot of projects need to imbibe, closely related to the coordination that I discussed. And then when it comes to the models that government should adopt, I think increasingly procuring energy services, rather than energy equipment, is one of the key pillars of this report. And I think we all need to come together in ensuring that that is, the way that projects are being designed moving forward, and also ensuring that there's the enabling environment for private sector to come in, because private sector would always want to build in the risk of, the public sector not either paying their bills. So we just need to ensure that those tools are in place to ensure that it's done. A key aspect again is around remote monitoring and just ensuring that really what is not measured cannot be managed properly, right? So we need to pay a lot of emphasis to that, and even when it comes to repayments and ensuring that the financial models work, this needs to be remote monitored. This needs to be able to be accounted for. So talking of accountability, which must be closely linked to the performance of the systems as well. Going back to even the design of the projects, I would say that the O&M of things, which is closely linked to obviously taking it from a service level, the O&M, operations and maintenance, is more important than even the installation, in my own opinion, right? So ensuring that that is at the core of your design from scratch is very important. It actually affects the way you actually design the entire project, because I would say when it comes to public institutions, no two projects are the same, right? Even when you look at the health sector, they have various levels of affordability, whether you're talking of primary healthcare centers or tertiary institutions and the likes. Invest in human capacity as well, because this is the only way that we're going to really be able to sustain these projects at scale. So that's very, very important. And just generally, seeing this from how, I guess, from the way DARES is looking at it, and with the good work that our team here and with the ESMAP team, Andrea and everyone have been doing, is the shift from delivering assets to delivering energy services, which is really the cornerstone of everything that we're doing in DARES. And I think I'll anchor on that, trying to keep to the time there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Femi. And just turning back to here in the room and with Christian. I mean, Christian, we're obviously on the education sector. We do a number of projects and investments, and the bank is still financing the building of schools and working with ministries of education. What do you think is that we can be doing in terms of helping with accelerating this move away from installing panels and then forgetting about them to making sure that we can bring more private sector investment in and do it over a longer period of time?
Very good. So I think the answer to this has been kind of already coming out of the conversation so far. I think we're recognizing that education plays a role in advancing the electrification agenda, and electrification plays a critical role in the learning agenda, right? So we're out of the sector silos, and we're recognizing that interdependence and mutual reinforcement. Now, that needs to translate into workable models. And so Femi's point on making sure that coordination works well is critical. I think what I'm thinking is that the approach that we're taking in the way of thinking what is the key solution here that is scalable? What is the package that needs to be put together, and how do we put that package and make sure that it works and it rolls out? So on the side of the education ministries, clearly education ministries need to have a seat at the table when it comes to the electrification agenda, need to know critically what's their role, and need to exercise that role. That requires that there is resources that are budgeted for paying for the service. So budget to make massive capital investments is too much to ask for, but budgeting for the service is something that's eminently possible, and that needs to be just part of the learning package. It just needs to be understood that the package of learning involves that, and that when it comes to scaling what we know works in the classroom system-wide, it requires that is done in a credible way, and that those payments happen, and that there's predictability, because only then the private sector, as we heard earlier, will come in, that there's this kind of predictability, right? And so making sure that this system works is critical. So from our perspective, as we think about our education operations, we're thinking very much in kind of a long-term way. How do you build gradually the system and make sure that the system is strong, and how do we leverage our resources in a catalytic way to make sure that the domestic resources are there and that the system, the approach scales over time. So we have operations that where an eligible expenditure is to pay for services, and I think that needs to be just the rule. And as we go more in the direction of programs for results with results-based financing to supporting government programs, to make sure that the government programs entail that payment for the service, so that it is not an afterthought. It's not something that one needs to be, reminded of. It's actually understood as being core, and that requires repeating and repeating and doing. But I think that's what we're in for, and I think that's why we are really, turning a big page in the way we're thinking about this and doing it together in an integrated way.
Well, that's very good, and I think as you mentioned, in terms of instruments, the way that we can do it now and provide financing on a results-based framework, that certainly allows us to shift the contractual structures towards a more service for delivery systems. Maybe a question that I have for you is, and we heard from Femi and Tomba as well, that it is important that there is coordination, there is planning on how these things are rolling out. And I was wondering, what do we know about, when you're thinking about improving education services, building new schools and all that, are there clear plans in the countries where we work that we can then try to overlay the plans of the infrastructure development? Is this happening in practice? Is this something that we can improve? What is your overall feeling on how this works in practice?
So in education, we don't have something like what you have for M300 at this point, which are country compacts that basically look at the key policy reforms and policies that need to be in place. Mm-hmm. We don't have that in terms of newly created compacts, but we have education strategies and education development plans in many countries. Those are documents that need to be updated over time, and I think this is now a critical moment to update those. We're also thinking, do we need to turn some of those into compacts just to give that visibility? That's an ongoing conversation. But I think what's critical is that there is a change in the way we, maintain our dialogue and conduct our dialogue around the fact that we are shifting from focusing on the inputs to shifting towards learning, right? So I give you the example of a conversation I've had with a Minister of Finance and a Minister of Education from a country in Africa recently, where there's a big story around investing in infrastructure to move away from double shifts in school. Clearly, double shifts in school are bad for learning. Mm-hmm. But it's not about, investing in hard infrastructure and that needing, to be hard infrastructure. The question is, what are the factors that shape learning, right? And so I think it's here where the education sector planning is shifting from, putting in place the infrastructure and saying, oh, well, this is not really my business. The electricity, it's the Ministry of Energy, right? It's not my business. To recognizing, well, it's the service that I pay for that's part of my learning package. Mm. That is an easy thing to say, but it's something that kind of needs to be brought into the dialogue, and where we need to be very clear about what's the interface between, the education compact, if you will, the education, strategy or sector plan, and M300 in this case. What's the interface? And to be very clear in our dialogue with the authorities and the dialogue with the private sector, in the community, to make sure that it's understood as that. But yes, I think it's perfectly possible to overlay and be very clear about the interaction and what it means for everyone in terms of the roles and responsibilities that they have.
Very good. So look, unfortunately, we're beginning to run out of time, and I just wanted to leave just a few minutes. I saw a hand going up, and I don't know if there are more questions and comments, but if I can ask very quickly, Femi, in 1 minute, and as you work in DARES and all the efforts of electrification in Nigeria, what do you think is the most important, the one important action that is needed in these next 5 years so that we can scale up the sustainable provision of services model for schools and education?
Thank you very much. I think doing everything we can to ensure that we can enable the private sector to thrive and to see this as a commercially viable product is everything we need to do in the next 5 years, essentially. Across, all the stakeholders, whether it's government, whether it's the development finance institutions, across board. Because, I'll give another example around the issue of coordination. Even within government, we see a lot of fragmented approaches towards, electrifying schools. And I think just rallying everyone around energy as a service and thinking around all the guarantees that can come in from not just a project by project, but a programmatic approach towards this. And everybody falls behind that. I think private sector funds will find any area that is stable, which we have proven under the DARES in a lot of other sub-components, whether it's the isolated mini-grids and others. And I think it's a similar approach and a similar stand that we must take in this regard, because powering public institutions, when it comes to productive use, I don't see any more important productive activity than ensuring that lives are saved and people are able to get educated for the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Femi. I appreciate and strongly agree with you. Tombo, from your perspective, what is the one most important action that is needed as we try to shift towards this model in the next few years?
Yes, thanks. I am going to cheat and say 3 things that the private sector needs to participate. So the first is just those clear and simple incentive and subsidy structures. Make it simple, make it clear, make it quick to access so that the private sector can participate. Number 2, provide clarity with regards to tariff regulation and participation in any such schemes. If that is clear and straightforward, we've removed another barrier for private sector participation. Number 3, provide potential for growth and expansion of revenues through additional addressable markets. And I think this is the wider community. And what does it take for that wider community to be a viable market? It actually requires, we go back to coordination across ministries again. To have viable end user communities, you need access to markets. For that, you need good roads. You need access to inputs. For that, the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Agriculture needs to be plugged in. For educated end users, you need your Ministry of Education to also be on point in those schools providing all these services. So ultimately, it comes down to, once again, coordination. But number 1, make it clear and simple with regards to incentives and subsidies. Number 2, provide the clarity with regards to tariff regulation and participation. And then the private sector will follow. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Tombo. I really appreciated the need for clarity, the need for rules that do not change. So, look, our team here has been monitoring the chat lines, and I'll pass it on to Raihan to tell us what is the chatter that you see, and what are the key points that are worth discussing further.
Thank you, Demetrius, and thank you to the discussons for this nice discussion and your views on this topic. I have seen several of our colleagues have wrote on the chat, and I just want to summarize what the theme is. So some of them have asked the question that what are the main hurdles? We are talking about install and forget, but is that the only thing, or there are other hurdles? Some said, is financing the only hurdle? Is government non-payment the only hurdle? Are there other hurdles? Roads, connectivity, and these are hurdles as well. Are education sector, health sector ready for this kind of technologies to embrace? So that's also some questions that came about. Then there was, I would say, a couple of questions about de-risking off-taker payment risk, because that's where the service from the private sector falls. And then if that happens after the bank project or whatever ends, and how will the private sector recover their investment? So that I see that some of the theme is there as well. There's one specific question whether we have any experience between lease to own and energy as a service model, because the report did not go into that detail about different types of models apart from talking about energy as a service. There are one or two criticisms also on the report, and the criticisms are stating that the report has not talked much about the health and education outcome benefits of electrification. It has gone into electrification of health.
We take it for granted.
We take it for granted, exactly. I mean, I felt we have passed that question 10 years ago, so that's why we haven't spent time on it. We are trying.
No, but it's a good point that we need to emphasize why we take it for granted.
Take it for granted, yes. And the last one is also some ask that why are we emphasizing on remote monitoring? What data is important? These sort of questions have also come. As they come, I will also come in. If anybody wants to take up these issues, you can.
Yeah, I think probably one question that I have as we're thinking about it, and maybe Femi, you can help me on that, or Tombo in practice. How much do you see the digitalization, the telecommunication, helping you to monitor about what is actually happening once you install something? To what extent are private sector providers using digitalization and telecommunications to monitor their own system and make sure that they are delivering? What have you seen so far?
Okay, thank you very much for that. I think from that point of view, when it comes to private sector and the use of technology, I think that is at the core of every business, because even when it comes to payment, your revenue assurance is tied to technology, ensuring that the systems are performing at optimal levels. Even when it comes to, because with technology these days, we have the BMS, which are a lot smarter these days. You are able to design your project in a way that fits into your specific commercials. And when it comes to things, renewables like solar and having hybrid installations, you're able to switch between different power sources or energy sources, whether during the day, times where there's not enough irradiation. We also go down to the other side when it comes to, on the government side, monitoring performance and just ensuring that the lights are on, as basic as that, because, when you've invested, no matter how little public funds, you need to ensure that there's accountability to a certain degree, in those remote areas, particularly. Again, this has to do with the level of, rural electrification. A lot of these locations as well, in a lot of cases, are very hard to reach. So the technology is required, remotely, to monitor what is actually going on in these areas. Let me anchor there. I don't know if Tombo has
anything on your side, Tombo, on this.
Yeah, no, I just completely agree with what Femi said. Technology is at the heart of it. And in fact, it becomes impractical without some of the remote monitoring tools that the private sector use to run these systems. I'll give you one example. In one of the sites where we have a developer providing electrification to a healthcare center and energy as a service to the community around, the O&M costs for that system are around $200 a month. And, just transport costs from the business center to access that community can be up to $50. So their ability to just monitor and track system performance remotely is completely key to the business case of being able to serve those communities. So that remote data monitoring, asset management through technology is central.
Thank you very much, Tombo.
Maybe one or two more questions just to share others. There's a thought coming in here is that some feels that through this report we are trying to pass on the responsibility to the private sector, and others are saying that will not work. The government has to be there. I just want to make sure that, yes, we do believe that it has to be a partnership across all sectors, government, donors, and private sector. And when we say government, we are not talking about energy sector or education. We are talking about Ministry of Finance or government as a whole. So that came in. And there's another question that what could be the de-risking? I mean, people are coming back on de-risking facilities. So maybe that's something, if we don't have time here, we can take up later. I just wanted to present it so that we hear what is coming up.
Yeah, I think it's important that whoever is listening also will take the effort to look at the report. And of course, we are happy to continue to support additional questions and additional implementation challenges as we go forward. Look, with this, let me, first of all, big thanks to Tombo, to Femi, and to Christian for joining us on this. I really appreciate the emphasis on how we need to be doing better on coordination, providing clarity from a contractual perspective, try to make sure that the education plans and the infrastructure plans are speaking more to each other, and the need for clear rules and clarity of how subsidies are delivered, along with a solid accountability and monitoring mechanism. I think these are good points of emphasis, and I wanted to thank you all for joining us for this launch. And with this, let me pass it on to Fanny, who is our ESMAP manager covering these issues, for a few closing words.
Yes, thank you so much. I mean, I guess you've already summarized it. I mean, just a really big thanks to Valerie, to you, Demetrios, to Christian, Femi, and Tombo for joining us and sharing, some really valuable insights on how this new model can be made to work. And I also want to extend my thanks to the ESMAP team led by Rehan and everyone around the table who has made this report possible. I guess just to hone in that point again, it's not, as Andrea was saying earlier, it's not about supplying that hardware, but really how do we make those solar systems sustainable and deliver the educational services, but also health services that we want to deliver at the end of the day. So it really requires a shift in our mindset in terms of how do we approach this. And I think the new 5P model really provides a great window of opportunity of doing this. Practical lessons that I would take home on this is really, first of all, coordination. When I'm listening to all of you, how important that is. Also to ensure the long-term maintenance and replacement costs are available. The really critical role of the private sector, and predictability of financing terms, tariff structure, and the like. So, what we've learned also is that some countries like Nigeria and Malawi, we've heard from the panelists, are already, deploying some of these models and providing for lessons learned. So I hope we can broaden this. As this report that we have launched today hopes to contribute to this part and provide the knowledge and operational tool that can help guide governments, partners, and the private sector to go from pilots to scaling up further. And this would also support more broadly the Mission 300, the universal healthcare for 1.5 billion mission of the World Bank, but also better educational outcomes, digital inclusion, and human capital development. As Christian highlighted, sustainable electrification to schools and health centers is about ensuring that students can learn, healthcare workers can deliver essential services, and communities can access greater opportunities. So I want to, again, thank everyone for participating in this. And the report is available on our website, and we're looking forward to more engagement on this.
And we'll make sure that it's soon available as a podcast as well. I'll take care of that.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Christian. It was really.
Thanks a lot to everyone. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.